Good morning. I'm David Matsinhe, Director of Research, Policy and Advocacy at Amnesty International Canada, the English-speaking section. I'm joined today by Omar Omar, and he's a representative of Gazans in Canada, and Alex Peterson, Senior Director of Strategy and Parliamentary Affairs at Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. We are respectfully gathered here today on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, the custodians and defenders of the Kichisibi, the Ottawa River watershed. In December 2023, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada launched a temporary residence visa program for Gaza residents with family in Canada. Immigration Minister Mark Miller pledged that, and we quote, Israelis and Palestinians in Canada will continue to find safety here, and we will do what we can to help loved ones who have fled the region, as well as eligible family members who remain in Gaza. Yet, nearly a year later, it is unclear if this program has enabled Palestinians to escape Gaza. This delay, even as relentless bombardment continues, is a tragedy and prompts a chilling question. Was this program deliberately designed to fail? The success of the Canadian-Ukrainian authorization for emergency travel shows what is possible. Over 2 years, Canada enabled nearly 300,000 Ukrainians, providing a pathway to safety and permanent residency. This demonstrates very clearly the government's capacity to act with urgency and resolve during humanitarian crises. We at Amnesty International Canada urge the government to follow through on its commitment to, in Minister Miller's words, to do what we can to help Gazans and family members in Canada. In a new open letter, Amnesty International, Gazan Canadians, and Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, along with other organizations, citizenship movements, lay out what Canada must do to create a real pathway for safety for Palestinians whose lives are at grave risk because of Israel's relentless bombardment of the occupied Gaza territory. Therefore, we call on the government to take the following urgent actions. The Minister of Immigration must immediately reform the systematic barriers in Canada's Special Measures Program as identified by the Canadian families of Palestinians trying to flee Gaza, including by waiving biometric requirements and increasing support for biometrics. Issuing single-entry documents for those lacking passports due to the destruction of infrastructure in Gaza, offering exemptions for medical exam until 90 days after arrival in Canada, removing caps on the number of applicants, increasing diplomatic pressure on Israel and Egypt to facilitate the exit of Palestinians, reducing the disproportionate burden of sharing social media and contact information in the security vetting process, provide immediate alternative evacuation options for Palestinians currently on the Special Measures Program, create an immediate permanent residence pathway for Palestinians with family in Canada, provide settlement services including housing, employment support, community integration, and comprehensive health coverage during their stay in Canada. We welcome the financial assistance measures announced on October 16. However, we regret that they are inadequate. We will now hear from Omar Omar, who will shed light on the dire conditions facing the Palestinians in Gaza at the moment. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Fellow Canadians, today I stand before you exhausted. It is 2024, yet here I am. I'm still having to explain why my family, my brother, my sisters, and my parents deserve the same dignity, the same compassion as anyone else. I'm tired of building a case that should not need to be made. Tired of pleading that we are human, that we are equal. In 2015, when Prime Minister Trudeau was asked why he chose to create a gender-balanced cabinet, he answered simply, because it's 2015. It was a declaration that time had changed, that equality was a basic, unquestionable value in this country. But here we are. It's almost 2025. And I'm still standing here asking for the most basic equality, not for gender, but for different ethnicities, for those who don't share the same skin color. It's been over a year now, and I'm still asking that my family stranded in Gaza, under the continuous threat of losing their lives at any moment, be treated with the same urgency, the same humanity that Canada extended to others. In the first 9 months of the Ukrainian program, over 200,000 people had their visas processed and arrived in Canada in the middle of COVID, work from home, and the Zoom fatigue. In the first 9 months of the Gaza program, less than 10% of visa applications have been fully processed, allowing only 426 people to escape genocide and arrive in Canada under temporary visa permits. It is the same immigration bureaucracy, but the color of applicants is different. And that stark contrast screams out of the Trudeau government is just an invested in old stock Canadian racism as its predecessors. I arrived in Canada 10 years ago with hope. As an international student, eager to integrate into Canadian society and build a new life. Canadians welcomed me with open and warm arms. And for the first time in my life, I felt I had found peace. I found a place where I could live without fear. But each year, on Remembrance Day, when I attend the parade in downtown Victoria, that feeling of safety was challenged. The sound of military cannons echoed across the city, bringing back memories of Gaza, the bombings, the trauma. I thought I'd left behind growing up in an open-air prison. Yet, I was determined to move forward in my life, to build a life and become a successful, contributing member of this society. Despite everything I went through, I persevered just as every Gazan Canadian here has done. I worked hard and become a successful professional and a business owner. But in the last year of real-time genocide, as I've advocated for my family, I've had to speak with politicians who dismiss us, who see me not a fellow Canadian, but as someone less. Every meeting, every interaction has been a reminder of the discrimination I thought I had escaped. It has been traumatizing, reopening old wounds. Each time one of them speaks, I feel a fresh wave of dehumanization, as if our lives, our families, means nothing. In 2016, I volunteered in Victoria, British Columbia, helping Syrian refugees settle and build new lives. And when I saw Canada welcoming thousands of Ukrainian refugees fleeing war, I felt hopeful. I believed that the same compassion would extend to my family. But it hasn't. the betrayal, the cold refusal has left me questioning if there is any heart left in this government, if there is any compassion left for people like us. This long fight, this exhausting advocacy has drained our resources and everything we have. We have lost so much back in Gaza. And here in Canada, this struggle is tearing apart the lives we have tried to build in Canada. Families here are shattering under the strains, losing jobs, losing partners, breaking under the weight of endless worry and exhaustion. The toll on our minds, our health, our very lives has been overwhelming. We are giving everything we have to push for our loved ones' evacuation, and it has left us empty. When Israeli allies around the world have taken action to bring their citizens, loved ones, out of Gaza, why has Canada turned its back? Countries like Germany, Turkey, Australia, even Tunisia and Algeria, even Libya, have successfully evacuated their citizens' loved ones to safety. Is Canada content to continue turning its back on our families in Gaza? Under this failed special measure program, not a single individual has been evacuated directly from Gaza. The only ones who have made it into Canada have done so entirely on their own. Often at great personal cost, exhausting their life savings to pay exorbitant border fee between $5,000 to $10,000 in a bribe money. Meanwhile, our Minister of Foreign Affairs travels to Israel, shaking hands with leaders who have openly called Palestinians human animals. To my fellow Canadians, I ask, if those in power cannot see the humanity in our suffering, if they cannot feel empathy for our families' cries for help, being massacred live on TV and phone screens, the highest daily death rate in any other major 21st century conflict, then what kind of people are we planning and placing in power? What values are we choosing to represent us? I didn't come to Canada to have to make this argument. I came here to live in peace, to be a part of this community, to work and strive in my 9-to-5 job, to enjoy the life that so many take for granted. But today, I'm standing here, forced to explain my family's right to live, to be safe, to be treated with the same humanity that is supposed to be a Canadian promise to all. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Yet today, that slogan feels empty. So I ask each of you, as Canadians, to look within. In this Canada, is this the Canada we want? Is this the Canada we believe in? Is this the country that holds true to its promise of equality, compassion, and dignity for all? Thank you so much.
Hi there, my name is Alex Peterson, and I'm Senior Director of Strategy and Parliamentary Affairs with Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. CJPME is Canada's premier advocacy organization dedicated almost exclusively to fighting for Palestinian human rights globally and in Canada. CJPME is here to support Palestinian Canadians with family members stuck in Gaza and Egypt, trying to flee Israel's genocidal takeover of Gaza. A few months ago, I was a lead author on a report called Intended to Fail: Systemic Anti-Palestinian Racism in Canada's TRV Program. In the report, we analyzed the difference between the Ukrainian TRV and the Gaza TRV programs, as well as the broader policy and political context that led to the utter failure of Canada's family reunification efforts for Gazans. We found, in our view, that Canada intentionally designed the Gaza TRV to be considerably more restrictive than all previous TRV programs. This was a political decision that came directly from the immigration minister's office on supposed security grounds. But let's be real. Security grounds in this case is a code word for racism. Canada has a track record of treating Palestinians as inadmissible to Canada if they support social movements fighting for self-determination. When I say fighting, that includes both nonviolent and armed struggle. That's because Canada's migration laws penalize Palestinians who are actively involved in resisting occupation and organizing for self-determination, even if it's nonviolent, despite self-determination being a peremptory norm under international law. In our report, I analyzed the case law and the policy context and found a clear pattern of Canada excluding Palestinian human rights defenders and their families from coming to Canada. Lastly, it appeared to me that Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly hadn't lifted a finger to push Israel to open its borders to allow Palestinians to leave Gaza. Israel has occupied the Philadelphia corridor, breaking its peace treaty with Egypt, and cut off all routes of escape from Gaza for Palestinians. Melanie Joly has allowed Israel to do this with impunity. Reuniting Palestinian families at this moment requires Canada to impose sanctions on Israel in retaliation for not letting TRV holders exit Gaza. If this government was serious about saving Palestinians, Israel would face serious consequences for preventing their exit from Gaza. Instead, Trudeau and Joly continue to arm Israel's obliteration of Gaza through its weapons exports, especially of F-35 fighter jets. This shows me that this government is an ally to genocide rather than a human rights defender, focused on living up to its international obligations under international law. That's why I'm here today representing CJPME, and that's why we're all here today calling on the government to change course and live up to Canada's potential and promise of human rights for all. They should reunite Gazan families now. We will now take questions.
Morning, Rapid Canyon, CBC News. This is for anyone who would like to address it. The government of Canada, typically when we bring up these issues with them, their response is that they cannot bring Gazans over on their own. They require the cooperation of both Egypt and Israel, and they sort of blame both countries by saying neither seems particularly interested in helping out. I wonder what your response might be to this claim.
My question would be right back at Melanie Joly. What have you already done? List the actions and the levers that you have pulled on Israel. What have you threatened to take away from the Israeli war machine that's bombing Lebanon and Gaza and committing violence in the West Bank? Canada has given full-throated support to that, and obviously Israel is not going to do what we want them to do if there isn't consequences.
I just want to elaborate on that one. So when Egypt, when countries like Libya, Germany, and different countries were evacuating people already before April and Israel takes the Philadelphia crossing, Canada was not evacuating any Gazan. They were barely able to evacuate Canadians. Even Canadians took them months to evacuate them. And when we were telling them all these countries are actually evacuating people in thousands, we even give them the list of people who got evacuated. Loved ones, not even dual citizens. We're not talking about German citizens. We're talking about German citizens, loved ones, evacuated in thousands, the same as Australians. Those are allies to Canada. Canada did not even talk to these people to help in doing the same exact copy-paste process to get our families out. And then they kept waiting until Israel took the crossing. Now, even UAE is evacuating people from the Gaza Strip, which just signed the normalization deal with Israel 2 years ago. Canada, with 75 years of relationship with Israel, can't evacuate a single Gazan. That tells you something. That tells you that this government, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs is not doing a single effort. They're not even interested.
Yeah. I could just quickly add that this is a humanitarian policy, and that inherently means there should be a principle of non-discrimination built into it. And there also should be a principle of urgency built into it. And there should be a principle of equity built into it. Equity means removing barriers for people to access programs and services. Removing those barriers in this case means the Canadian government must do everything that it can do, as other governments mentioned here have been able to do. in order to remove those barriers. Pressure on Egypt, pressure on the Israeli government to ensure that those barriers are removed so that Gazans are able to access this service. We are not convinced that the Canadian government has built those principles into this policy, none whatsoever.
If I can ask you specifically, follow up. David listed those barriers earlier. I'm wondering, can you tell me, has your family had to go through them, and how difficult has that been? Like going through the history of finding all their old social media handles, or I believe there's also a requirement to list every single injury they've had and when and where it happened. How hard is it to do these things in their circumstances?
So the government knows that almost in the Gaza Strip, you cannot contact with anyone there. They shut down telecommunications from day one. It's almost impossible to get hold of anyone there. Imagine my family is located in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, not even the south, okay? No, they are in a starvation mode. How come you want to reach someone who is already dying in a starvation mode and ask them, give me your social media? I don't have all my sisters and my brothers-in-laws and sisters-in-laws actually on my social media network. I don't have all their phone numbers. They wanted us to go and contact every one of them and get their parents' information, date of birth, and every single one in the family, and every scar if they have a scar. I personally have scars. What does this mean? How this is going to bring terrorism to Canada if I have scars? You're talking about almost 180,000 people got injured. Everyone in Gaza has a scar. But what this tells you is they're just trying to be very direct with you, to tell you that we even doubt your own scar. This is the dehumanizing language that we are seeing with the government that makes us go beyond being angry. And then when you get angry on the government and you start screaming, they start putting the stereotyping, like, oh, the angry Arab, the angry Palestinian. They dehumanize you, turn you into a monster, and then they blame you for that.
I think one other important fact to note is that the Kerem Shalom crossing is open for citizens. It's Canada choosing to not use its diplomatic leverage to also get TRV holders out of the Kerem Shalom crossing. Israel is allowing currently any citizen on if Canada were to provide a bus, Canadian citizens would be able to get out of Kerem Shalom and take that bus to Egypt or Jordan. Canada needs to put specific pressure on Israel to allow Canadian TRV holders, so that's someone who's not a Canadian citizen, but they're a family member, to be able to get on a bus as well and to provide that bus and get them to Jordan and Egypt to continue the process. They're not putting in that effort from Kerem Shalom to the neighboring country.
If I can maybe ask one more question to Alex. You referred to pressure on Israel and also used the word sanctions. Obviously that has not happened at this point. Canada has usually acted in concert with other allies when it comes to sanctioning various regimes or countries around the world. Do you think that's what they're waiting for, and does that make it more difficult for them?
I mean, we have unilateral sanctions legislation called the Special Economic Measures Act. So if we really, really were committed to it, we have the legislation in place to kind of go it alone. I do recognize that it's obviously more effective when you place sanctions in a collaborative fashion. But if Canada was serious, it would hold a summit and get the other foreign ministers in place and be like, we need help getting our family members out. I just turned that back on Melanie Joly and I asked her, what's your plan to actually put pressure on Israel? And please report on the effectiveness of that plan and how you're adapting your tactics. She has not once stood in front of the country and said, this is what I have done to help get family members out of Gaza for the Canadians here waiting for their families to get out.